Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about training with bands. And this isn't even really a controversial topic anymore. I'm surprised we don't see more people in the general fitness world and people over in more of the body composition and bodybuilder type world doing this, because this stuff is used everywhere else. Strength sports, powerlifting, this stuff has been used for decades. Like, bands have been perfected in these circles. They're heavily used by all athletes who require explosiveness. You see very, very heavy use there, right? Explosive athletes, field athletes, contact sports, all these things. Band use and strength and conditioning programs at the elite levels, very heavily used. They have been for a while now. How about physical therapy and rehab? You betcha. There are tons of physical therapists who incorporate band work into the resistance training, and not just doing bands, but even hooking bands onto some of their equipment. Right? They use bands. This has wide-reaching applications. What people should be thinking about is like, wait a minute, if all these strength athletes use this, and physical therapists are using this, and physical therapists are usually concerned with building muscles, right? Building muscles in a way that's not going to hurt people further in injury prevention. And they use this same stuff. Well, why am I not using it? That's a good question. That's a very good question, because bands add a new dynamic to your training. And it's one thing when you're using little light bands like you saw me doing on some of those heavy bench presses at the start. Those are lighter bands. We start getting into my speed work, and we are using heavy bands. Like right here, I have 130 pounds of band tension on these speed squats. Right? And it's not unloaded completely at the bottom. There's a mild amount of tension, and by the time the bar starts to get about 2/3 of the way up, I'm at 130 pounds for the rest of it. Jerking against those bands, and they jerk you back down. Same thing on my speed benching. I'm running like 80 pounds of band tension. The deadlifts, it's like 150 pounds. Right? We're running a ton of band tension. Why? What are we doing with this? Well, there's a lot of things that happen with bands. Right off the top, they teach you to accelerate. When you have to hit heavy bands, whether you're doing speed work or max work or anything else, when you start hitting really heavy band tension, and I'm not talking about adding 20 pounds of bands to a bar. Now, if you're a weaker person and a smaller person, 20 or 30 pounds of bands might be a lot. And so in that case, it is heavy band. Right? I mean, realistically, if you bench 135, for a few reps, if you were to hook a 30-pound band onto 135, you probably wouldn't be able to do a single rep. Okay, that's a lot at that point. It's a lot. You get more advanced, it's not. But the explosiveness aspect, when you hit bands, they will tend to jerk you back down. It teaches you to lift faster, to lift more explosive. Now, you'll see a lot of bodybuilding types will say, well, I want to lift slow. Well, why? Do you want to be more athletic? Do you want to hit upper threshold fibers? And here's the thing I might ask you. If you're not hitting those upper threshold fibers regularly, how do you know you're hypertrophying them maximally? You might have hypertrophy being left on the table. Okay, and I'm not saying that you can't hit a lot of those upper threshold fibers with high rep work and low rep work and everything else. That can still be done. But because you're not maximizing that, you might be leaving gains on the table. And guys who are trying to get big, why would you want to leave gains on the table? Furthermore, why wouldn't you want to learn to be more explosive? It'll make you more athletic. Do you want to be more functional? Don't you want to be more powerful and stronger with the muscle that you have? Don't you want to learn to use it better? I mean, you're already training. But the main thing is that the force production difference. You have to push hard against bands. They will decelerate the bar. And what's been noted by researchers who've looked at it's pretty serious band tension being done on lifts is that it changes the deceleration curve. And if it changes the deceleration curve, when we're exploding maximally, what happens? Does the time under tension at which we are at peak force production higher or lower? Well, it goes up. We're actually spending more microseconds of every rep Again, the amount of time that we are at that peak force production, or even the time under maximum tension, as far as the muscle is concerned from a force production end, is being increased because we're decelerating that explosiveness. Okay, there's something to that, right? It's like most lifters, when they start talking about time under tension, what they really mean is that the amount of time they're spending at the peak resistance. That's really what they're talking about. Realistically, they construe it out to be something different, but that is what it is. When the muscle is under peak tension, you're trying to just expand the amount of time it's there to get better muscle fiber recruitment. That's generally the idea. I'm not saying it's always valid, because it can be invalid at times. But that's what they're trying to do. Well, the same thing here. If we're changing that maximum force production, kind of like hang time, because of the deceleration of the bands, aren't we maintaining maximum force production longer so there's more time under tension with it? Absolutely. Absolutely, that's exactly what we're doing. The researchers have noted that as a potential for a larger training response. And people can say, well, that's just theoretical in the lab. Well, look at the number of jacked, strong, explosive athletes who use band work. Are you sure that's just in the lab? You sure that's just in the lab? I don't think it is. I think it's been proven in elite sports for decades. The researchers are just now getting around to finally starting testing it in the last 10 years and really looking at it closer. No, the data's there. The anecdote is there. Why aren't you using it? Then we come over to all the other stuff. How about the eccentric component? How about the enhancing the stretch reflex? These are things that you see people chasing hypertrophy worried about. Look at the forces involved when you deal with bands with this. Get the forces involved. Or they want to talk about stabilizer muscles. You hit a big heavy weight against heavy band tension and talk to me about stabilizers. My God, it will work stabilizer muscles. All these guys, well, I want to use dumbbells to work more stabilizers. Have you tried speed benching against bands? And I don't mean 10 pounds of band tension. Put 70 or 80 pounds of band on there and explode against it as fast as you can. And try to stabilize that when you unrack it. You don't think that has some hypertrophic potential? What about the overspeed component? Bands jerk you down. We know that they speed up the eccentric reps and actually enhance the eccentric effect for a portion of the lift. You don't think having a portion of the lift where the eccentric component has a higher force production has value? What is the studies on eccentrics? The guys say, well, the eccentric loading causes great hypertrophy. Yeah, because you do heavier weights with it. Not because you're going slow with your normal weight you can do 15 reps with. That doesn't actually produce the result in the lab. It's the eccentric overload. Okay? Bands can create that overload. They jerk you harder than the gravity of the weight would. Again, thus requiring the muscles to contract harder on the eccentric rep to try to slow it down. Okay, you're getting an eccentric overload effect. Better look at how thick a lot of the guys are who we use this speed work with the bands and things. Not saying we're always pretty, but we're always thick. You don't think this is a factor? Just anecdotally speaking, and then you look at the forces involved in the way muscle fibers respond from a science perspective, it adds up. It makes sense. All right, so we've got this eccentric component. It also facilitates a lot of times a larger stretch reflex. How many bodybuilders do you see and people chasing gains who are trying to work on getting a stretch reflex, a myotatic reflex? You say, what do you mean? All right, how about getting a deep stretch on dumbbells and then reversing it? Right? When you don't pause the bottom and you just get a stretch because the pec contracts harder. You know that feeling? That's called a stretch reflex. How about when you do an incline curl because that muscle is being put into a stretch position and you reverse it immediately? It contracts harder at the top, right? You get that deeper contraction. That's been studied in the lab. We know that happens. The muscle actually does contract harder as a result of a stretch. Okay, we get a stretch reflex from the bands too. On a lot of these exercises, depending on how we reverse them, it enhances the stretch reflex. Okay, that has been linked to more gains. Doing some band training is actually a real good idea if you want to get really jacked. It's a good idea. I'm not saying you should do it for all your stuff, because you shouldn't do it for everything. It's actually a little hard to recover from sometimes. But this could be kind of the next ticket to breaking through a plateau in your gains. Give it a try. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.